It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland. That'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
It's called Howl at the Moon.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Welcome on back in. Got a lot of things to talk about. Going to talk some politics. We've got a very special podcast by George Liveline guest, and it's Victor Tiffany. And Victor Tiffany is a progressive organizer in upstate New York, founder and chief administrator of the Bernie or Bust strategy. Now, that's very important. We've talked about it on the podcast. I think it may be more important than anybody is giving it credit for. I think it could determine who the Democratic nominee is for 2020. I think it could determine whether or not Donald J. Trump is reelected. We'll see what Victor has to say here in just a few minutes, but I wanted to get some other news of the day in and some other things that have been kind of top of mind with me, and maybe some things that I'm gonna start a new segment of the show. I'm gonna call them head shakers. These things are, God, I just can't believe some of the stuff that comes down the pike. And one of the things is just down the road from me, probably 20 miles away. This made worldwide news. A gender reveal that went wrong. Did you hear about this? I had no idea what a gender reveal was. I'm in a locker room getting ready to go out on the ice to play men's league hockey, and one of the younger guys comes up to me and says, "Did you hear about that gender reveal that went wrong and killed that woman?" And I looked at him and I said, "The what?" He said, "The gender reveal." And I said, I thought I misheard him. I had very few times in my life has anybody had come up to me and said something and I had no idea what in the hell they were talking about. I just kind of nodded my head and went along with it. I didn't know what he was talking about. Well, gender reveal, it's a way of exploding a smoke bomb or something that's a color blue or pink to determine or to let everybody know about the birth of a child and its sex. It's something off of reality television or TV. Didn't know anything about it. Anyway, this one went way wrong. I mean, a complete miscalculation on what this explosion needed to be, and it turned out to be an unguided missile, basically. It was a pipe bomb, for lack of a better description. A piece of it, like shrapnel, flew through the air 45 feet and killed a grandmother that was there for this celebration, for this party. My God, you talk about tragedy in the heartland. But like I said, it made world news. This has got to be unprecedented. I never heard of this. It could never happen again. All right. A few days later, there's a report that one went wrong near here also, about 30 miles from here. And nobody was killed, fortunately, but another explosion that went wrong. And I guess they've been having issues with this around the country and other places. And my God, gender reveal put Knoxville, Iowa on the map around the world for a couple of days anyway. It's just a complete head shaker. Well, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is more traditional in the way of news, and it has to do with polling. We've talked about how you can't trust polls, you can't believe them, but I'm a sucker for them. I can't help but look at stories about it. This comes from the USA Today, and it reads, "Even as support for his impeachment grows, President Donald Trump continues to be backed by a seemingly unshakable core of supporters who say he's not done anything wrong and agree he is the target of a political lynching." A new USA Today Suffolk University poll finds Americans are split in the survey about whether Trump should be convicted by the Senate in an impeachment trial and removed from office. 46% in favor, 47% against. Having close to half of registered voters support his eviction from the White House is politically perilous territory for any president, of course. I think a lot of people know that he's unlikely to be convicted in the Senate. Maybe that has something to do with this polling. You got to take these factors into consideration. Despite damaging new testimony, however, 30 to 40% of those surveyed remain solidly on Trump's side. That's a significant asset for the president as the House of Representatives prepares to vote Thursday to affirm the formal impeachment investigation. I don't know. By the time this comes out, he could be even in more hot water. I think Trump's going to be impeached in the House, similar to how Bill Clinton was. It'll go to the Senate, where you got a bunch of gummers like Chuck Grassley in there, Republicans that are not going to convict a president from their own party in a trial in the Senate. Trump will use this more than likely to try to, tout his vindication and build support as he comes to the 2020 election. The thing yet to be seen as to whether or not this does more harm than good. Let's hope it does good. But here's the head shaker part of it. Let's go down here just a little bit and read a couple of quotes here. Quote, "Let's look at the economy, wages, unemployment, foreign affairs, tariffs, and other things like that," said Stephen Kay, 67 of Riverside County, California, a retiree and a Republican who was among those surveyed. His rhetoric might be a little much, do you think? But he's making good policy. Trump is making good policy. I mean, there's a head shaker for you. William Skelski, 84, a Republican and retired real estate agent from Mission Viejo, California, blamed Democrats' negativity for Trump's troubles and called him one of the top 3 presidents since Washington and Reagan. One of the top 3 presidents since Washington and Reagan. This guy says that straight-faced. The president's solid core of supporters don't comprise a majority of the electorate, but they do provide a political foundation that energizes him. Witness his speeches that stretch an hour and longer at raucous rallies and helps limit defections from other GOP officials. My God, how did we arrive? How did we get here? Well, some of the answers in this book that I talked about a podcast or 2 ago. Hate Incorporated by Matt Taibbi. You want to check that out. Because it's very revealing. He does some real good work in there to talk about how we went from the 60s and 70s when we had 3 major television networks, the innovation of Fox News, innovation if you want to call it that. Of course, MSNBC on the left plays a role in that as well. And how that polarization of America that we're suffering from so mightily that could result in people you're going to put Donald Trump on Mount Rushmore. Some people want to put him in chains. They want him convicted of treason in this country. There's not much middle ground on this. You're either in one camp or another. But, that was the head shaker that I wanted to get to there. And then lastly here, before we get to Victor, and this is kind of a good lead-in for him, we talked about Medicare for All and about how, one of the talking points of the Republicans and even the Democratic Republicans/Republicans, I think they're so centrist they are Republicans in the debates, is are we going to get taxed for Medicare for All? Yeah, you're going to get taxed. Government gets its money from taxation for this program. That's how they're going to cover the cost of it. You won't be paying premiums, deductibles, out-of-pocket expenses. So you won't be paying as much on an annual basis for your health care. You will see a slight increase, some people will, in their taxes, but it's going to be less expensive for people's health care programs than what they're paying for now. And I wanted to also, Joe Biden, he's the one who always talks about $3 trillion and how is the government going to afford this? Okay, this is a U.S. government. We're the richest country in the history of the planet. They got more money than the Pharaoh does, for God's sake. We're able to blow up the planet 100 times over with a nuclear stockpile that is bristling and pointed at everybody that's considered to be even a minor threat to the United States. We got all the money in the world for that, but we can't seem to afford Medicare for All to keep people alive, to keep them healthy so that they can get wealthy, for God's sake. Smaller countries with much smaller GDPs and economies than the United States are able to afford it. Germany, France, Canada, places like that, they got Medicare for All, but we can't afford it. At least that's what people like Joe Biden wants you to believe. We just can't come up with this money. Well, we can come up with money for all of those other things. When it comes to blowing people up, we got deep pockets for that. But this comes from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and this is worth reading into. This was a special open letter analysis that they sent the Senator Sanders campaign, and it reads, "The most fundamental goals of Medicare for All are to significantly improve healthcare outcomes for everyone living in the United States." Yeah, I mean, that's key. Everybody's focusing on the cost, which is republicanism in its finest. As long as you die with money and you don't have to give it to the tax man, that seems like the ultimate goal of a Republican. For me, I want to live. I want to be happy and healthy I want to have that pursuit of happiness before I croak, and I don't care how much is in my bank account when it happens. But anyway, their goals are to significantly improve healthcare outcomes for everyone living in the United States, while also establishing effective cost controls throughout the healthcare system. These two purposes are both achievable, they say in their analysis. As of 2017, the U.S. was spending about $3.24 trillion on personal health care. That's about 17% of the total U.S. GDP. How healthy are you feeling? How wealthy are you feeling? Is it worth 1 out of every $5 in the GDP of this mighty nation going to the healthcare system? I think not. Meanwhile, 9% of U.S. residents, roughly 1 out of 10, they have no insurance, and 26% are underinsured, over 1 out of 4 underinsured. They're unable to access needed care because of prohibitively high costs. Other high-income countries spend an average of about 40% less per person, and they produce better health outcomes. Medicare for All could reduce total health care spending in the U.S. by nearly 10%, to $2.93 trillion while creating stable access to good care for all U.S. residents. Now, that tells us it actually could cost less than what we're currently spending. And you could find another survey or another analysis on the conservative side maybe that would try to refute this. But the point of it is that you're spending money regardless. You're using your government for what I think it's intended for, which is to keep us alive, to keep us safe. Not to blow people up around the planet in the pursuit of oil. It's to keep people healthy and wealthy, particularly right here at home. So that's that. That's the last head shaker. And that's an excellent lead in to our guest on the podcast by George Liveline, Victor Tiffany. And here's Victor. So, Victor, thanks for coming on the podcast this afternoon. And I got to tell you, Victor, when it comes to the Bernie or Bust movement, I've talked about it on the podcast before, and I'm not into this as deeply as you are, but I put it to people simply this way. I tell them that because of what happened in 2016, particularly here in the state of Iowa, the Bernie supporters, a lot of them, are not going to be deterred in 2020. They are members of the Bernie or Bust movement. They got screwed, basically, in Iowa and around the nation in the primaries in 2016. And so it's going to be Bernie or nobody in 2020. And what I've been telling folks is because of that, and because I think the Bernie supporters probably comprise as much as 25% of the active Democratic voters. I mean, when you think about it, the Democratic Party is mostly a bunch of schlubs they don't vote anymore, but the Bernie people do, and they're going to vote for Bernie or they're going to vote for nobody. If they don't vote, if Bernie's not the nominee in 2020, I've been telling folks Trump will win. And people have been telling me, nah, there's not that many of them, and they wouldn't do that. And okay, so I'm looking around the internet. I come upon a Newsweek article, and there's yours, Victor, your opinion piece, and you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks for having me, George. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I've been working Twitter all day today, and a woman just got a hold of me, and she pointed out a paradox. Because the Bernie supporters, 80% of them voted for Hillary Clinton, she won the popular vote. And because of the 20% of the Bernie supporters who either voted for Jill Stein or wrote in his name or voted for Trump, she lost the general election. So the paradox is Bernie supporters helped her win the popular vote and lose the election.
No.
So that was 2016. Now, what we know, the reason we say in this article that Bernie or Bust is a warning, that's how we begin.
Yeah.
And the very last sentence is, barring a recession, Bernie or Bust is a foregone conclusion. And that's because we have data this time that we didn't have in 2016. So those numbers that I just spouted about the 12% who voted for Trump, we didn't know that going into the general election, of course. There's no way we could have predicted that kind of future. So the idea in 2016 that Bernie or Bust was a prediction didn't bear out until after the election when we got or bust. This time around, we have data. We have more data. We know, for example, there is a Bernie or bust generation. The post-millennial first and second time voters are going to stay home. That's their idea of or bust, even though we make it a point to say in our article in Newsweek that it's not about staying home. We're trying to get people on the same track, which is a lot like herding cats.
Yes.
But at any rate, their idea is they're going to stay home if Bernie's not the nominee. And problem in terms of how much leverage that brings to bear is we don't know if there's 1,000 of them or 1 million of them because no polling has been done to that particular group. But it's mostly college students. Add to that, there's a Bernie or bust resolution that was passed by Democratic Socialists of America a couple months ago. That was pretty weak, T. It didn't really specify that they wouldn't vote for the Democratic Party nominee. They just wouldn't endorse the nominee as an organization unless it's Bernie Sanders. But there's also polling out there that indicates more Berners, more people supporting Bernie Sanders this time are going to vote for Trump than they did last time. And the problem is the polls that these people are citing, including Emily Larson on the Washington Times, conservative Washington Times, the poll she cites, we've looked at, we've scrutinized this poll top to bottom. We can't find any data on there that even closely resembles the 26% figure she cites. So we're still searching for that. But let's say the numbers are the same. Let's say 20% of Bernie supporters will not vote blue. And we have a poll that we conducted on Facebook. It's not scientific. It was just Facebook Berners. That number is 64% will not vote blue unless it's Bernie Sanders. But Facebook is slanted because we built Bernie or bust out of Facebook. It was started in Facebook, and we built it using Facebook. So that 64%, it certainly isn't broadly across the entire Bernie nation, if you want to call it that. But people should take that very seriously because we did not poll any Bernie or bust groups or pages, just the Bernie pages. So if we go with just the 20% from last time, we know this is going to be a close election. Why? As bad and as grotesque as Donald Trump is, he's got economic winds at his back. And this is why we very carefully, condition our forecast, our foregone conclusion on these economic conditions. You don't unseat a president when economic times are good, when unemployment is low, when inflation is low, when the stock market's doing well, and consumer confidence is up. All current conditions. So it's going to be a close election. And that 20% of burners from last time will be more than enough to slide this election over to Trump. And so that's why, I'm not a prophet. I'm not saying this is a foregone conclusion because I can see the future. I'm saying this is a foregone conclusion because we're looking at the writing on the wall. We know certain numbers are in place, and there's a lot of distrust for certainly for Biden. He hasn't got a chance, no matter what the polls are saying.
Agreed.
But even Elizabeth Warren, Warren's going to be defeated.
No, I think you're exactly right. I told people on the podcast early on when the first 20 were announced, I said, there's 3 candidates I can guarantee you will not win. I have a better chance of winning than Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, or Pete Buttigieg. I mean, I'm just looking at reality here and the way Americans vote and the way the electorate is, and it ain't happened with either one of those 3. And then I look at Bernie, and I tell folks this. I say, my wife was a precinct captain, Victor, back in before 2016, and she ran around the neighborhoods, door to door, by herself, talking up Bernie, getting people to turn out and vote. We won our precinct. I mean, she really worked hard on it. She gets home and finds out that in other precincts here in Iowa, they were tied. The caucuses were, and there were 12 that had to be decided by a coin flip, and Hillary Clinton won 12 coin flips.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
That's the kind of serendipity that was going on in 2016. And so Bernie actually won Iowa, any way you look at it, maybe just on the science of coin flips, if nothing else. He also won Minnesota, he won Michigan, and he won Wisconsin. Well, you put those 4 states in the Electoral College as blue states, and Trump loses. So, I look at it that way and say Bernie's the nominee. He's the guy that can take on Trump and beat him. And all of the Democratic centrist moderate friends that I have that are big party people, and don't ask me why. I don't get that part of it. To me, it's all about the policies and the candidate. I don't give a tinker's damn about the party, but other people do. They look at it and they say, well, yeah, anybody but Trump. Okay. Bernie, and the reason is he's got this Bernie or bust contingent that he's going to sink your battle. They're going to sink your battleship if you don't vote for Bernie. Oh, well, they're not so sure. They're anybody but Trump, but they're not so sure that they're for Bernie. And you point out in your article, now this was an eye-opener for me, that some of these corporatist moneyed interests in the Democratic Party, if they don't see one of their candidates come out to protect their financial interest, they'll vote Trump.
They've already announced that. Yeah, they've said that if Elizabeth Warren is the nominee, the plutocrats that fund the Democratic Party are going to be helping Donald Trump. So we know there is call it a Biden or bust faction, but it's what the one percenters. It's a very small group compared to the people Bernie will bring aboard, and it's not just the Bernie or busters and the Bernie or Trumpers. This is something. Other information that we have that we did not have in 2016 from a study, and we cite this study in that Newsweek article by Thomas Piketty, French political economist, who looked at 70 years of voting habits in the United States, France, and England, and came to the conclusion that poor people and poorly educated people will not vote at all. This has nothing to do with Bernie or bust. They won't vote at all unless there is a social democrat on the ballot. And the social democrat is the European phrase for democratic socialist.
Yeah.
They'll come out and vote for Bernie because they want higher minimum wage. They want free education. They want free health care that they desperately need. So, or a federal job guarantee. All these things that Bernie's proposing are things that poor people and poorly educated people will come out for. And one more point about this that reinforces, so what? Those people are out there. How do we know they're going to vote? Bernie has an army of 1 million volunteers, and he's got his own database this time, his own voter database, and he's got Burn app, which is connected to that voter database. So these volunteers going door to door are finding these poor people, these poorly educated people, these Obama, Trump, or Obama, Sanders / Trump swing voters, these working class voters who have given up on the Democratic Party for whatever number of reasons. They'll find them. They'll make sure they're registered to vote. They'll make sure they get a phone call the day before or the day of the election reminding them to vote. And I believe they're even going to set up in states and regions or districts or precincts where they have this capability, a ride to the caucus or a ride to the primary polling place, or a ride, if this works, to the general election polling place. So he's got something no one else has, that, and you're going to need that, which is this broad coalition of blue no matter who, Bernie or bust, Bernie or Trumpers, and these poor and poorly educated Americans that normally don't vote at all. He'll pull them out, and that combined with independents, who, independents might look at a socialist versus a neo-fascist as the lesser of two evils, right? Because evil is in the eye of the beholder, if I can grossly summarize an entire book by Friedrich Nietzsche in a sentence. So these independent voters might think, oh my God, I don't want to vote for a socialist, I don't want to vote for Trump because of all the things that Trump is. They may see Bernie as the lesser of two evils, and they'll vote for him. Why? Because they know climate change is real, and they know we need to do something about it. And really, if that should be the motivating factor for every human being on this planet right now, is getting this climate. Everybody who understands climate change is real and something needs to be done about it. Only Bernie's bringing to the table a massive Green New Deal, a sufficient, or I shouldn't even say sufficient, a necessary Green New Deal that alone won't turn this thing around, because we've got positive warming feedback loops in place, which a Green New Deal alone isn't going to reverse. So we have a lot of unprecedented geoengineering problems that we're confronting, and it's going to take a progressive form of government, not a conservative, not a libertarian, not a neoliberal form of government. It's got to be a progressive form of government that can mobilize the resources necessary to convert fossil fuels to sustainable energy, capture carbon and sequester it. And the third leg, some kind of safe geoengineering to cool this entire planet off enough to stop these positive feedback loops. This is unprecedented, and we need an unprecedented president like Bernie Sanders.
Like Bernie Sanders, and it needs to be PDQ, because a lot of people, and I tell Trump supporters this all the time, they don't like his Twitter account. Some of my Democratic friends don't like, they're knee deep in the Russiagate baloney, and they don't like Ukraine Gate and all that kind of stuff. And I said, folks, Trump is fiddling while the earth burns. I mean, that's literally what's happening here. The most important issue facing us that he's not addressing, and a reason to get him out of there immediately, is the climate crisis, because the climate scientists, and I've had some on podcast by George, they'll be the first to tell you it's not an exact science. They don't know when is too late. Too late might be next year. It might be 10 years from now. It may have been yesterday. That's how imminent the danger is. It has to be dealt with immediately, and Bernie Sanders is ready to do that on day one. The other thing I'll say, Victor, just with my knowledge of this part of the country, is those western states, or states to the west of Iowa anyway, that are solid red in that electoral college. Those states used to be referred to as populist, with large populist voters. Well, populists can see progressivism. I mean, they're not that far away from it. They have one thing in common with progressives. They hate the big moneyed interests out east. And, of course, you don't have anybody deeper in the swamp of the big money interests than Donald Trump. So I think a progressive like Bernie might actually appeal to, and might even flip a state that would surprise some people because of that populism category. The one thing I did want to check, I wanted you to talk about a little, just briefly here before we leave, because I really liked it in your article. I'm going to read it here. You said race, gender, and so forth are unimportant compared with policy. Yes, we welcome a woman president. Yes, we welcome a gay president. However, identity politics are always trumped by policies that will be carried out by someone who will do more than pay lip service to the kind of change that will benefit the vast majority of Americans. And I think that's all critical. I mean, and we felt we suffered from that a little bit with the Hillary thing. Yeah, she was a woman, and it would have been nice to have a woman president, but that's not top of the list right now. I don't know if it ever was. And the same thing with a gay president. Yeah, we'd like that. I mean, nothing against gay people, and it'd be nice to have a gay president, but these things are like number 37 and number 38 on the list of priorities. Would you agree?
Well, yeah. I mean, needs, I don't care if you're talking about a family or a government, a local government or a national government or the United Nations. What we need in any given moment trumps, no pun intended, trumps what we want every time, every situation. And the fact is, we need a Green New Deal. We need a Green New Deal. We don't need half measures that we're going to get from Senator Warren or Vice President Biden. We need the full approach toward addressing this. And as I said, the Green New Deal is necessary but insufficient. It's going to be more than that. And I know Bernie's going to understand this when he gets the scientists around him. As president, he's going to look at carbon capture and try to figure out the most efficient way of doing that. He's going to look at the problem of positive warming feedback loops and initiate some studies. But there's no question about it. People, we do want these breakthroughs of history, like a woman in the White House. But my God, we are on the edge of human extinction. I mean, in geologic times, that might be 100, 200 years away, but that's a blink of the eye in geologic times. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the problem people are having wrapping their heads around this emergency. It's an emergency that's decades long, and humans have not evolved in a way to acknowledge or recognize an emergency, a crisis that extends over many, many years, right? Because for us, many, many years isn't an emergency. It's something we have plenty of time to deal with. So, like I said, we just, the policy that we are most referencing is what we were just talking about, which is climate change and the absolutely desperate need for climate preservation. And unfortunately, it's any blue won't do when it comes this way. No middle ground is Bernie's slogan. No middle ground is going to be enough to address this. And as I said, even Bernie's Green New Deal is necessary but insufficient. Even that's not going to be enough. So if Bernie or bust works, if Bernie's persuasive ads and campaigning combined with the Bernie or bust warning works to get him the nomination, then we're in a different situation. Leverage is moot because we're out of the primaries. Then we're in a situation where we're confronting a climate assassin versus climate preservation. So the slogan will switch from Bernie or bust to burn or burn, B-U-R-N.
That'll be great. Well, that's a great stopping point. That's a great way to put it. And let's hope that it happens, because time is short and it's getting shorter all the time. And I really appreciate him coming on, joining us on the podcast by George. Live line is Victor Tiffany. He's a progressive organizer. He's up there in upstate New York. He's the founder and chief administrator of the Bernie or Bust strategy. And with Patrick Walker, he formed the Revolt Against Plutocracy organization, and he co-authored Bernie or Bust, Pioneers of Electoral Revolt. Victor, anything else you want to close with before I let you go?
Well, I just want to reference that book that you mentioned. It's the only how-to guide for peaceful revolution within the context of a two-party system. So it'll make a great Christmas gift, birthday gift for Democrats who don't really understand the need for a revolution in this country, and it's really would help Sanders if more and more people understood that need.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's recommended by Podcast by George. Put that on your shopping list, folks. Again, that's Victor Tiffany on the Podcast by George live line. We'll leave it there. That's the end of today's podcast. We'll be back with you very soon. Listen to us on all the platforms, Facebook. We're even on the iHeartRadio app, and we're on Twitter, YouTube, all those places. But for right now, we're going to wish everybody a good one, and that's another podcast by George.
Come on, let's hear it.